In this video, we are going to examine the climactic fight at the end of the first Dune novel, Atreides versus Harkonnen, Paul versus Feyd Rautha. We will examine the tactics used by each during the fight and examine how it shows the distinct personalities of each house. Let's get into it. Spoilers for the first Dune novel throughout. Feyd Rautha, with the Emperor's blade and approved by the Emperor to relieve him of all restraint, faces the leader of the Fremen and of House Atreides, Paul Maud'dib, with the Fremen Crys Knife. Paul has prescience, which means he can see possible futures, and he observes the guild navigators who share this, and how, in this place and time, they are blind, even as I am, so he has no advantage knowing the outcome of the fight and what the future will hold. Feyd's blade is checked for poison. It's cleared. Feyd taunts Paul, then attacks, but Paul avoids the blade and notes that Feyd fights with shield, condition, hesitation. This refers to those who wear personal body shields, and that those shields can only be penetrated when the blade is slow enough to pass through it. Too fast and it will bounce off, so that hesitation is Feyd going slow, as if there is a shield, when he should be using his full speed. Feyd taunts Paul, whilst Paul studies him, and notes how Feyd presents his right hip as though the girdle of armour there protects that side. Paul's suspicion is raised at Feyd's confidence against someone who has just crushed the Emperor's forces. Feyd attacks, and his blade scratches Paul on the arm. Paul then realises the shield condition hesitation was on purpose, to draw Paul close due to Feyd's slow speed before he showed what he could really do. The confidence returns to Feyd, and Paul wonders if the blade carries poison, despite it being checked earlier. Paul uses his training from his mother to control his body, and senses a trace of something from Feyd's blade, a sophoric. It should dull Paul's awareness and senses. Paul changes the molecules of the sophoric to render it harmless, a skill his mother will have taught him as part of her Bene Gesserit body control. When Feyd attacks again, Paul pretends the sophoric has dulled him and slowly faints, and at the last instant meets Feyd's blade with his own. Feyd ducks sideways and is safe, but Paul was able to cut him. Paul's weapon, a Crys Knife, is made from the tooth of a giant sandworm, and the Fremen commonly add poison to their blades, where the nerve of the tooth used to be. Feyd accuses Paul of using poison. Paul counters and says there was just enough acid from his blade to make them even in combat, so doing just enough to equal the playing field, but not gain advantage over Feyd, showing the honour the Atreides have. Feyd closes, angry. They end up pressed against each other, knife hands gripping. Paul, suspicious of the right hip, thinks it may contain a poison flip dart, and forces Feyd to turn his body right and that hip safely away from Paul. But he then sees a needle below the belt line on Feyd's left hip. Paul reads Feyd's change in movement and barely avoids it. It throws Paul off, allowing Feyd the ability to throw him to the floor and land on top. Feyd forces the needle closer. It will stop your muscles, and my knife will finish you. So, to the audience assembled, the Emperor and the Fremen, it will look as if Paul just lost the fight, showing Harkonnen cunning. Facing death, Paul feels the pressure to use a secret word to slow Feyd. Before the fight, Jessica, Paul's mother, tells Paul that as he and Feyd are products of the Bene Gesserit breeding program, and as part of a way to ensure the sister's control, there is a secret word she can tell Paul that will slow Feyd and render his muscles useless. Paul, showing the honour of his father, turns down the offer. I want no special advantage for this one. Feyd gapes, and the hesitation allows Paul to find the weakness of balance in one of Feyd's leg muscles and reverse things so he is on top and Feyd's right hip is high and left low, positioning the poisoned dart safely against the floor. Aided by the blood lubricating his arm, Paul gets his left arm free and thrusts once hard underneath Feyd's jaw, the point slid home into the brain. So you can see throughout that both fight as their families do, with Paul being even-handed and keeping the struggle fair, such as rejecting the secret word and paralysing Feyd, only enough with the acid, whilst the Harkonnens use subterfuge and hold no morality except to win using poison and making Paul think it is the right hip he should look out for. Now, friends, let's turn this over to you. What do you think to this climactic fight? Should Paul have won it earlier when he could, or did Feyd miss some advantage? Comment down below.